We're live now.
Barnes.
Here.
Delgado.
Here.
Fasella.
Present.
Friedman.
Here.
Nudo.
Here.
Ula.
Here.
And Devevic.
Here.
Quorum is present.
Is there a motion to approve the agenda as distributed?
So seconded.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. I don't see anyone in the audience that would like to speak to the board, so we'll move on from there. We'll move on to the next agenda item. Is there a motion to approve the Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District Board Meeting minutes from April 24th, 2024, open session? It's been moved by George Friedman. Second?
Second.
Second by Sharif. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next, we'll move on to communications. Any communications from the board? Anything, Carl, from you? Then it's your turn again. Managing Director's report.
All right, let me first start with two introductions. We've got two new members of our august group here. One is our new trustee, Paul Debevic. I'm going to read a little intro that he gave me, a little mini bio. Paul has been with the Department of Physics at UIUC since 1977. He is an experimental particle physicist. After his so-called retirement in 2008, he developed the core course for the Engineering College Masters in Energy and Sustainability Engineering. He has lectured in this course annually since its first offering in 2012. In addition to that, Paul plays the bassoon in the Parkland Community Orchestra, enjoys ballroom dancing, and is busy with do-it-yourself projects in their new home. So welcome, Paul. And then also, I don't have a bio to read, but another new member is Avery Sanborn, who is our new Illinois Student Senate representative to the advisory board. So welcome, Avery. All right, with that, I will get going with our April statistics. In April, we had 1,110,573 riders. That is a 23.8% increase from last April's 897,000. So that's great. The fiscal year to date ridership is up 13.8%. That's 1,045,123,000. No, I did the same thing that Ashley did last meeting. I read the number wrong. It's 1,045,123 passengers above the fiscal year to date last year. We have been rolling back in additional service, which has been a long time goal, as you know. And in April, we added service back to the 22 Illini route and the 24 link route. And so we were getting closer to full service, but not quite at full service at the end of April. But now that we're in summer service, we're at the full level of service. And we, as you've heard me say, we anticipate that in the fall, we'll be able to maintain the full campus level of service. The next chart that we have here, let's go back one. Just to point out the continued stair-step recovery. This is not year-to-date. This is just for April with that 1,098,000 rides. So we're down about 9% from the pre-pandemic level. But as I said, we're up 23.8% from the number the April of last year. All right, now we can move on to operating revenue. Operating revenue is 21% above April of 2023 and 21.4% above fiscal year 2023 year to date. So good numbers with the revenue. The operating expenses were 17% above April 2023, and as you can imagine, putting in the additional service that I mentioned earlier is a big piece of that, but also the service restoration efforts into recruitment and retention that we initiated in the intervening year. Year-to-date operating expenses were 12.6% above fiscal year 2023. The year-to-date operating revenue is $2.2 million above budget, and the operating expenses are $3.7 million below budget. With that, I want to quickly highlight, I think we have some pictures here. Before we get to the budget, I want to show the pictures of the Juneteenth bus. We've been getting a lot of really positive buzz about that. I think we'll have those. They're in your board packet. There we go. So some local artists, Kamau and Stacy Robinson and Kamau Grantham, they combined their efforts and call themselves Black Mau, and they did the artwork on this Juneteenth bus. That's one bus, but two different sides of the same bus. You can see that the sides are dramatically different. We think it's really cool and a pretty spectacular celebration of Juneteenth. And so I'd encourage you to look up Black Mau, and their website explains the meaning behind the artwork. All right, with that, now we can move on to the budget. I guess before I do that, are there any questions on the report?
So I have a quick query.
Yes.
So service-wise, it seems like we are almost getting back to normal. I mean, like, pre-pandemic level. So are we like 95% of that, or what percentage of that extent of service?
Actually, right now, we're at 100% of our service level, but that's because during the summer, we reduce our level of service. But we are at the normal summer level of service, and we're providing 100% of that scheduled service. Then the fall, when we ramp up to the full service, we believe that we'll be able to do 100% of that level of service. So we think we're good to go. We still have new employees coming in this summer and are going through the training. So we'll have a couple of graduates coming out of training class this summer before the fall, and we think we'll be good to go.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, so let's dive into the budget. The first sheet there we go. This is just a synopsis with notes, kind of giving some primer notes before we get into the meat of the budget. A couple that I want to highlight. Number one, the previous labor shortage caused several wage adjustments and incentives to be implemented. Those are the recruitment and retention initiatives that we put in place. Two significant items are number 3 and 4 on this list, two different forms of insurance. One is medical insurance and the other is our liability insurance. The world of insurance right now is really in a topsy-turvy kind of place. We had already completed the budget, and we had our new rates for our medical insurance, and then several weeks after that, they adjusted them mostly up on us again, which was an additional adjustment up compared to what I had used in the formation of the budget. So we were a little caught off guard by that. We did do some quick last-minute adjustments to the budget to accommodate that. A really unique circumstance, our claims rating actually improved from last year to this year. We received a higher rating, which normally, in normal times, that would have your premium go down, but we had this higher rating and our premiums went up too. So the good news is, presumably, I'm searching for good news here, but presumably the amount that it went up was less than it would have been had we not had an improvement in our ratings, although I don't have anything to compare that to. So I'm just, that's how I'm sleeping at night, as I'm convincing myself that's what the situation is. Liability insurance continues to struggle. We've talked about this the last several years. We've been dealing with large increases in our liability insurance. As you recall, we participate in a transit insurance pool, a self-funded pool. And so we cover the first $5 million of that pool, and then above that we have excess carriers that we contract out with, and those are the premiums that are going up dramatically. It's a result of there being fewer and fewer carriers in the public sector generally, and specifically in transit. There are just fewer insurance carriers who are willing to get into transit insurance. In addition to that, insurance rates are going up anyway because there are so many natural phenomena that are causing insurance payouts right now with wildfires and hurricanes and tornadoes and floods. The insurance companies are just sucking wind right now, really. They've got more going out than they have coming in, so they're trying to adjust the premiums to survive. Just a heads up, I guess, that those are some of the things that we see. With that, I will move on to the next page. This is a real pulled out, like 30,000 foot view of the budget. The operations, maintenance, admin, and Illinois terminal, those are the 4 departments that we budget for. You're not getting any detail here. You're just seeing the total amount for each of those. And then we have some capital down below that. All of that I'll get into a little later and unpack as we progress through this budget presentation. I will say just in general that the FY 2025 budget is about a 4.5% increase over the current FY 2024 budget that we're currently in. That's primarily made up of a 3.75% COLA increase on wages, and then we'll be adding additional service. So Sharif, we talked about being at 100% of our 2019 level of service. Actually, we'll be a little above that because we're adding some hours of service in with the Northeast Connect. Remember, the Ruby that will be replacing runs in the morning and the evening only, peak time, and the Northeast Connect will run throughout the day, so they will get a higher level of service, and so that's built into this budget. All right, moving on to the next page. This is a rundown of our operating revenue. That top line, the state operating grant, that is our, it's called, we'll refer to that frequently. You hear us talk about DOPE all throughout the year. Paul, Avery, just so you know, we're not talking about weed or any other kind of illicit drug. We are talking about DOAP, which is Downstate Operating Assistance Program. And so DOPE is that state operating grant, and that is a primary revenue source for our operations. The total there, the $63.6 million in revenue, you can see if we move over to the next page, compares to $57.2 million with our operating expenses. Much of that difference then will go into our local share of capital projects. Okay, moving on, we get into the operations department, and I've got this broken down into a couple of different categories. Wages, this is the biggest driver. This department's wages are the biggest driver of our budget. As you've heard me say, that when we put a bus out on the street, 75% of that cost of driving a bus on the street and picking up passengers is in the driver. Wages and fringe benefits in total make up on average 75% of that expense. So when we talk about budget increases, it primarily is driven by this. Okay, and then the fringe benefits are just generally, most of those are a percentage of the wages, so one follows the other. You can move on to the next screen. Okay, this is services. We've got a couple of just kind of miscellaneous things here in services. One thing that I do want to point out is that you can see the ADA service line item is continuing to grow year after year. We are providing a lot more ADA service with each new year. We have more individuals who are applying for and qualifying for ADA services, and then they are utilizing the service more than we have in the past. So that's not something that we have control over. We have federal law requires us to provide ADA service, and it is just totally dependent upon what the fluctuations in demand what fluctuations are, and the last several years the only fluctuation has been up. Okay, with that, the material and supplies consumed, I want to point out that the fuel line item has gone down a little bit. The fuel line item in the first place sees a lot of fluctuation because fuel costs are a little hard to pinpoint down at the beginning of a year and to know what it's going to be all year long. And so we budget for the high end so that we had the money to purchase diesel fuel. But we have over budgeted that a little bit. But most of this downward jump is because we now have 12 buses that are using hydrogen instead of diesel fuel. And so those 12 buses that are in service will never use diesel fuel, and so that will reduce our diesel consumption. All right, and then finally, just to point out, that department is seeing a 6% increase, but that's mostly made up by the cost of living increases and then the additional service that we're adding to the Northeast Connect. Okay, moving on to maintenance. This is our second largest department, our second largest budget, and it really is primarily made up of the cost of living increases and wages and fringes as well, although it's a much smaller group than the operations department. It's roughly 50 employees versus 225 employees on the operations side, so the impact is not quite as significant. I do want to point out one of the things that we have in the budget that I am hopeful that we want to actually spend this year, but last year, if you remember, we launched a Parkland scholarship, and we paid for a student to go through the diesel mechanic school, and he now has graduated from that program and is a full-time employee of ours. He's fantastic, has been a really good fit into the maintenance department. We have it budgeted to do another scholarship, but we won't do that until we need to. And so we're actually up one employee in the maintenance department within the maintenance technicians because we had the scholarship graduate, and we promised him a position, and that helps us get through the work better. And so if we lose another technician, then he would get slotted into that position, and then we would initiate the scholarship again for another student. Excuse me, just a moment. So that is built into the wages and the fringe benefits on this budget. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. Here, I want to point out some growth in the contract maintenance. That primarily is because of some, yes, I'm sorry, Sharif.
So regarding that scholarship program, so is it tied with something like someone goes through the scholarship program, he or she has to be with MTD for certain years after that?
Yeah, exactly. They sign an agreement with us. I'm riffing a little bit, but I'm pretty sure I'm close. I think it's 5 years that they will stay with us. If they leave before then, they can. They're not indentured servants, so we they can leave. But then they would owe us back a prorated amount figured from that 5-year target date. So that's really what it is either we write the debt off after 5 years, or you leave and then you pay us back a prorated amount. Let's see. I think I was talking about the contract maintenance, the operations and maintenance agreements, O&M agreements that we have for the solar array that we have at the sanitary district that powers the electrolyzer. We have an O&M agreement with Trillium to operate and maintain our hydrogen production station. So that's what you're seeing here with the jump in the contract maintenance. The revenue vehicle repairs, that's gone down a little bit. Mostly that's because we have these new hydrogen buses that are under warranty, and we will, at the end of this year, at the end of this calendar year, we will be receiving those 26 new hybrid buses, and so they all will be under warranty too. And so we generally see this line item fluctuate up and down a little bit depending on how many new buses we have that are covered by warranty, or how many buses are all out of warranty that we're paying for 100% of the repairs on. So that's why you see a little bit of a dip there. The maintenance department is looking at a 5% increase for this fiscal year. Any questions on maintenance? Okay, moving on to general administration. Not a lot to point out here. There's not much change in the wages. Of course, the cost of living adjustment is applied to everybody's salary also, but this is one of the smaller groups that we have, and so the impact of that just isn't very much. They get the same, we get the same 3.75% that all the hourly employees get. Everybody gets the same thing at MTD. We're all in this thing together. So moving on to services, I'll just point out that the contract maintenance here jumps up a bit too because of operations and maintenance agreements, but also because of this new, you've heard us talk about GASB, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, and the new GASB rules associated with software and the way that you pay subscription fees to software now. This is when we have software that's applied to the entire district, the cost of it is just put into the admin budget instead of the individual departments. Let's see. I think moving on to the next one is the liability insurance. I've talked about how liability insurance increases. You can see that this actually isn't very large of an increase in the budget. That's primarily because we anticipated last year that we would see an extremely large increase, and then when we got the rates, we don't get those until after we've done this budget presentation. The rates, we did see an increase, but they weren't as much as we had been warned that they would. And so the budget reflects the increase from last year, but the expenses aren't anywhere near that. And so we just bumped up the budget this year to accommodate the increase because we already had room from last year. Hopefully that made sense. So ask me if you don't understand what I meant by that. The admin budget is seeing a 1% increase. Okay, I think we can move on to Illinois Terminal, our smallest department, and there's really not much to note along here. Their entire increase was 4%, which is right in line with the 3.75% cost of living increase. But again, it's a small group, and you can see how that moves throughout the wages and fringes. And then you can go to the next slide. We've got services and materials consumed. There's just not a lot going on there. And so one of the biggest increases we see are in sorry, that's not even accurate. The miscellaneous, and I'm not even remembering off the top of my head what that increase was for. So I can look that up and email it to you. I apologize, I'm not remembering what that is, but it's a pretty small amount within the relative budget of the entire district. All right, moving on. Unless there are any questions about Illinois Terminal. This page is the non-dope. So these are the expenses that we have that are not eligible for our state operating agreement. The state grant is intended to pay for public transit services, and we do some things that are not public transit related, like this room that we're sitting in right now. Though we use it as a boardroom, most of it is a banquet facility, and so we are just an owner of the building, and we have a tenant here, and when we have expenses for maintaining this building, those expenses are not eligible for transit grants. And so that's what shows up in this budget. Same with the District 116, the school district rents part of our building in Urbana, and we maintain that building because we own it, and so those expenses are not eligible, so they appear here. And let's see, moving on to the last section, we've got a couple of capital items. This first one is debt service projects. This is a unique characteristic of that DOPE, that Downstate Operating Assistance Program. That grant is for operating expenses, but these are capital projects that qualify for operating expenses because we will borrow money to pay for these projects. We will only carry that debt for the amount of time that it takes to implement the project. So that could be 3 months, it could be 6 months, it could be 9 months. It's almost always less than 12 months. We borrow that money. The principal and interest for that loan is eligible for operating expenses. And so these are capital projects where the operating grant pays for 65% of it, and then we pay for the other 35% out of our local capital reserve. So that's a great program for us, but a little quirky. I do want to point out these two sections on here. The bottom section is just projects that are 100% local capital. That comes out of our local capital reserve. The second line in that section, the miscellaneous facility improvements, there's a portion of that project that is related to the first line item in the debt service. So where it says Illinois Terminal cabinet unit heaters, this is almost a 25-year-old building now, and the cabinet heaters, the electric baseboard heaters are in disrepair, and we want to replace those and also integrate those into our building control software system. And so some of the floors in this building are transit related, like the first two floors, and so they're eligible for DOPE, and so they're in that top section. But floors 3 and 4 are not eligible for DOPE, so they're in the local capital. We need to do it throughout the building, but part of it will be transit reimbursed and part of it won't be. The other thing I want to mention is the 1101 generator. I don't know if you remember last year, I'm not recalling the exact month, but remember we had that really bad storm with the straight line winds that just knocked our community on its heels. We lost power for a significant part of time at 1101, and we have a generator there, and we even run the generator for a test. But when it came time to really step up and provide power for the building, it failed that test. And so we, again, that's a 20-plus year old generator, and so the manufacturer is saying it really needs to be replaced. And so that's what this budget item is, to replace that. We really need power at that building. When we lose it, that's where our control center is. That's where all the servers are that run the vehicle tracking and all of that. So it's very critical that we maintain power there. Okay, moving on to the next section. Sections, I guess, this top one, the federal capital grant, that is generally speaking 80-20 split between federal grant dollars and MTD local dollars. These projects are not underway technically, and some of them are not even funded yet. And so they're in the budget because they need to be reflected in the budget as we pursue grants for these projects. So for instance, that top one, the hydrogen station expansion, that is, we have submitted grant applications for that, and they want to know that there's support on the board's part for that project. And so we included in the budget. Of course, we'll bring contract work to you and agreements for you to approve, but this is approving an appropriation of money in support of the project, and the granting entities like the Federal Transit Administration want to see that prior to awarding a grant to it. So that's the case with the hydrogen station and the body shop. Maintenance, storage, the Illinois terminal expansion, of course, you're all familiar with that. We've been talking about it for 9 years now. We have some funding for that, but we have a new development partner, and we're working through the development agreement and financing for other parts of that project. So it's in the budget because it's an active project and partially funded, but unlikely that we'll see. I'd love to see some architectural and engineering expenditures come through our budget this year for that, but I'm not even 100% sure that will happen, so we'll see. The next section are federal grants. This is finishing out the ARPA money that we received. It's the American Recovery Act, the COVID recovery funding, and we can use that as 100% funding for those projects. These are all underway. To varying degrees. The vehicle storage floor drains, we haven't gone out to bid, but we've done the engineering work on that, and so the other projects are literally underway, but that one hasn't gone out to bid yet, but we've done all the engineering work. The high-speed doors, the doors have been delivered, they just haven't been installed yet, so that won't happen. That's actually in our current budget too, but it won't be complete by the time that this fiscal year is over, and so we're rolling it over into the next fiscal year. And then the bottom section is a state grant that we received for expanding the solar array on the roof of our maintenance department. For a while, this got delayed because we talked about putting it in the parking lot over here at Illinois Terminal instead of on the roof of the maintenance department. But then we started talking about this parking lot possibly being part of the expansion project, and so we pivoted back to moving the solar array to the roof of the maintenance department, and so that's why that's been delayed. But we got the $2.1 million grant for that, and we would make up the remainder of that with the $2.8 million of local funding. Okay, that was a whirlwind tour of our budget. Paul, I'm sure you have all kinds of questions, and we're meeting on Monday, so we can go through in detail if you want then. But as always, you can always call me or email me as well as ask me right now if you have any questions.
No questions for Carl? Okay. Next, we'll move on to action items. First of all, the DSC, the Developmental Services Center contract.
Yes, this is an annual agreement that we bring to you. It's kind of related to, I mentioned earlier that we're federally obligated to provide ADA service, Americans with Disabilities Act, I should say, ADA service for our individuals in our community who are unable to use fixed route service. And so we do that, and one of the things that we do that is in that line item that I was pointing out earlier is we contract with Developmental Services Center to provide ADA service that we're required to provide, but they actually do the provision of the service for their clients. The reason we do that is because we pay them to do it, and so that saves them money, but we want them to do it because for that community, they know those individuals and what their needs are and what their disabilities are, and they can provide a much, much, much higher level of service to those individuals than we ever could. And so it works really well for everybody, for the passengers, the customers, it works well for DSC, and it works well for MTD. And so this is the annual agreement that we bring to you every year.
The university's been doing that since, I think, the late 40s.
That is true. That's not what this agreement is, but we have a partner agreement with DRES, D-R-E-S, and they are a department of the university. We have a very similar agreement with them for them to provide ADA service for their students with disabilities. And so, again, it's their population. They know the students. They know what their needs are, but that's not what this agreement is. This is with DSC, so very similar concept, but two separate agreements.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, do I hear a motion to approve the Developmental Services Center contract for fiscal year 2025?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next, we'll be discussing the C-Cart service agreement to Illinois Center for Transportation, ICT. Jay?
Hi, everybody. Jay Rank, Operations Director. Earlier this spring, representatives from the U of I reached out to us, to MTD, about providing service from campus to the ICT facility, Illinois Center for Transportation facility in Southeast Rantoul. They asked MTD if we could do it, and it's out of our district, so ultimately the answer was no, but C-Carts is capable of doing that. So we went back and forth with them with the requirements, the needs, the hopes, with their budget and what we could do with our existing routes, and ultimately came up with an idea that works relatively well. It's a modest adjustment to the Rantoul connector route, and it's adding basically one trip in the morning from Lincoln Square in a diversion to ICT, and 2 trips in the afternoon coming back from ICT to Lincoln Square. So that represents 1.66 hours a day of additional service, and we are looking for basically retroactive approval for this. It started May 12th, and we had to put this together in a hurry because they wanted to start for the summer service, so they have faculty, staff, students that needed transportation up there. We held an open house in Rantoul. We met with the RTAG, the Champaign County, it's a subcommittee of the board, the Rural Transit Access Group, and walked through the plans with them. And we took it to the county board last Thursday, and it was approved. So we are looking for the approval to do this minimal service. We set it up as a 3-month pilot project and hope that it will continue for longer. But I think they wanted to see how, actually both parties want to see how it goes before we commit to further service.
Jay, can you explain what the Illinois Center for Transportation actually is?
Well, to be honest, I don't know everything that goes on there, but it's a part of the College of Engineering, and they have research. It's a research lab, I believe. I understand they do a lot of research, including autonomous vehicles. They have a test track up there. But yeah, I haven't had the pleasure of going yet. Hope to.
It's clearly part of the university. They need the link there.
Correct, yeah. ICT is part of a university civil engineering department. I previously worked with them, so it's kind of like the research unit of IDOT as well, the Department of Transportation. They do lots of pavement-related research. It's in the same location where there used to be the air base in Rantoul, and the new autonomous track, it's also there.
Thank you, Sharif. Any other questions? Phil?
I guess since you do already have it in place, just kind of doing quick math in my head, it looks like it adds, maybe 14 minutes of time to some people in Rantoul's commute, just because the bus has probably got to swing out there from the Walmart. It's all the way on the southeast end of town. That's got to come back. Have we had any feedback from any of our regular commuters on the Eagle routes about that either way? And I guess the other side of that would be, are we seeing a decent amount of utilization of the ICT stops?
Yeah, so it really only affects one trip in the morning. It delayed the time point at the Walmart, the Rantoul Walmart, by 15 minutes. While we make the diversion up there, the afternoon trips are basically additional. One's an additional trip, and one the route ended at the Rantoul Walmart, and we kind of diverted over there, so that didn't affect them at all. So we haven't had any feedback that I'm aware of about the service, and we are tracking ridership. The last I heard, there was between 2 and 7 riders in a day, our individual riders. So 4 to 14, I guess, rides a day. The only issue that I've heard is that they picked Lincoln Square because of the parking, but then found out that there's a 2-hour parking limit mostly around there. So that's something that we still need to work out, is either a more suitable parking location or options to get from campus to Lincoln Square. Or maybe when we talk about changing the routes, extend it to campus. And we talked about that initially, but they wanted to keep the budget as slim as possible, and even the extra time to go from Lincoln Square to campus, they wanted to reduce that. So yeah, depending on utilization and how much, how much they can find in their budget, I hope to find an answer for that.
Anything else for Jay? Okay, do I hear a motion to approve the C-Card service agreement to Illinois Center for Transportation?
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Now we'll discuss the update to the digital accessibility policy.
Good afternoon. I'm Ryan Blackman, the Technology Services Director. Amy and I have been working over the past several months on an update to our web accessibility policy, which we've expanded to become an all-encompassing policy that we are changing to be called the Digital Accessibility Policy. Our two main aims with this were to comply with new, or make sure we are in compliance with new rules issued by the Department of Justice, kind of expanding their interpretation of Title II of the ADA, so giving us some clarity on, the specific things we need to do to stay in compliance with that law, but then also to build a framework within MTD to make sure that we have a way that when we are procuring software, that when we're going out to bid to, get a new software product, that we are able to do so in a way that ensures that that software is accessible and stays within the standards and guidelines for digital accessibility. So as a reminder, the board approved our original web accessibility policy on December 8th, 2021. We've updated it once since then. This new policy, like I said, it's a fairly large expansion, but it maintains kind of the same overall goals and intentions. It just elaborates a lot on how we get there and the processes for doing so. I also wanted to note there's a typo in the board memo here. The date for compliance with the Department of Justice new rules is actually April 2027, not April 2026. Anything you want to add? So we're happy to answer questions. Otherwise, we would ask that the board vote to approve this policy.
Any questions, Phil?
I was just going to move that we approve the policy as printed.
Okay, we'll take a motion there. That's fine. Is there a second? Second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next Decennial Committee of Local Government Efficiencies meeting will be next month, Wednesday, June 26th at 3 p.m. here at Illinois Terminal. And the next regular Board of Trustees meeting will be immediately following that Decennial Committee meeting on the 26th of June. That's starting at 3 with the Decennial meeting and then the regular board meeting. Do I hear a motion to adjourn today's meeting?
So moved.
Second? Second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.